Hey everyone, this is Darryl Webster and quite a panel and group of people today. Good now to you, as we say on the internet, because we're all at different time zones. This discussion today is going to be about Office 365 groups, whether we're using them publicly or privately. It was a question that came about on the new Office 365 network from Lily Diaz and Christopher Clay from Lubrizol. And we've got a few experts or people on the panel, people that have been using groups to discuss how they're using it and their choice between public or private and how they're using that. So as a format, what we're going to do, I am recording this so that the network can benefit from the meeting and the content. And I'm going to try and also just make some notes, use OneNote as a whiteboard so we can start comparing things and fleshing things out. You might see I'm using Sway, so there will be some content later that you can view as well to share. So without further ado, I'm spinning on down here. The question was really around how we're using public or private groups, and there's a link there to the question itself. Lily was asking about how documents were being used and how they might be shared, and I thought it was a great idea to just open this up. So some of the questions that we're going to be addressing, and we'll get into that shortly, but we'll just do a quick round of introductions. We have, we were going to have Lily, but we have Christopher Clay from Lubrizol. Christopher, if you just want to spend a minute or less introducing yourself, and I'll also pass the torch around or the mic around to others.
Yep. So my name's Christopher Clay, and I am here at Lubrizol. I'm on the Enterprise Content Management team, and I'm mostly working with OneDrive and doing some analytics with web trends. But one of the things that I've been recently tasked with is working in groups alongside of Lily. So that's me.
Great, thanks, Christopher. We'll also introduce Kevin Crossman.
Hey, good now, everyone. I'm at Juniper Networks, and I'm the service owner for Office 365, the content side, so not email, not Skype, but all the rest of it, including Yammer, groups, SharePoint, etc. And we have been late adopters to groups, and so I'm really going to be intrigued by the conversation, and I have some opinions, but none of this is in practice, so I look forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Also introducing Benjamin Nealon.
Hi, good morning. Well, I'm not sure good morning, but my name is Benjamin Nyland. I focus a lot on the, I come from the SharePoint side of things, but obviously groups plays and will play even more of a big part as it starts integrating with SharePoint. So I'm definitely keeping a close eye, and I've been using it for quite some time.
Thanks, Ben. We're going to be having Simon Denton join us. Simon is from another company that's extensively using groups, but we're going to open this up to others on the call if they're not shy to take themselves off mute as we discuss things. I know that there's a bit of to and fro as we discuss things on Skype, the inevitable collisions, so we'll work our way through that, but let's get started. So the initial question we're going to look at is how we're using public or private groups, and we're going to just try and hear how we are using them, what sort of use cases we have. Some of them obvious, maybe some of them are a little more interesting. So we'll just open that up. I'm going to just also flick that over. So
before we go on to that, if I may interject, I think it's important to also kind of clarify what is Office 365 Groups very quickly. I know I have entire talks on it, but just in case not everyone knows what groups are and sometimes have some confusion, maybe we can start with a very quick introduction into what are Office 365 Groups.
Sure, you go for it.
All right, well, maybe I'll get corrected by one of the folks from Microsoft there on the call, but essentially Office 365 Groups is a list of people. Right, it's in many ways we can see that there's even a migration tool that allows from Microsoft that allows people to migrate their distribution list into Office 365 Groups. So already that kind of hints at that it is a list of people. Now, the advantage is that when you create this group, when you create this list of people, instead of doing the manual job or work of going to each different product that you may have in your company, Office365Groups allows you to link sort of everything together. It's what I think has been dubbed the fabric in many marketing slides as well. So it's really a way of creating a list of people that represent a team, a project, a group of people basically, and have Microsoft go provision everything from the best of each product. So, the email part from the Exchange, the calendar, for file management, SharePoint, for task management or lightweight task management, we'll go get Planner, and eventually start integrating with more and more as that story continues to mature, with many things announced at Ignite or vision to come at Ignite. I do believe, so excited for that.
That's a good summary, and I like the way that you focused around it being people to start with, because as a productivity tool, it starts with people and it branches off to the various services that they might use, and they will just choose what other pieces they might need to use. Maybe they're just going to use the conversations and the files and just completely ignore the calendar. Is that your understanding, Kevin? Kevin, you're still looking into groups, so is that how you've understood it as you're looking now into using that at your own organisation?
I think that was a great summary.
Great. And anyone on the call too that is currently using groups a lot, and how would you describe groups to your people within your organisation? Ooh, a little bit of shyness. Should I pick on someone? Let's see.
I will focus in on this, if possible.
Sure.
I'm a consultant in the Netherlands for Office 365, especially focusing on education. And basically they're using groups, and with Classroom, which is an extension on groups, just came out in preview. They basically focus on using it as a collaboration space in classrooms. And now with Classroom especially, you have also more functionality around it that is extended. But it's mostly used to collaborate on work within the classroom, and that is also where the interesting discussion on public or private starts off.
Yeah, agreed. And we'll guide into that too as we look at the different use cases. In fact, let's just draw a couple of lines here. We'll go public and private. And I do like the way that you brought up education as a use case, because definitely even before Microsoft Classroom is available, I know that some schools were making use of Office 365 Groups. Apparently they were one of the higher adopters of the system even before businesses started taking it. So yeah, that's definitely good to use. Now, while we are discussing the education use case, were they using public or private groups, Mike?
Well, the bad thing here was that initially the group's functionality was enabled in public mode automatically, and some of the schools that I'm working with got it provisioned before we even as a partner saw it, which is I think about a year ago. And what happened was that all the students and scholars started off using it and putting their documents in, with the bad side effect that all these documents were all of a sudden visible for everyone using Delve. So they're putting in documents and they made them visible through these groups without themselves being aware of it.
Right, so then there was a rethink about how groups should be used, and perhaps thinking that maybe they'd recreate them in a private space?
I'm going to jump on that as well. I think the discussion is very interesting because we're talking about public and private groups, but we automatically and often switch into the document sharing. And I want to go back a bit to that notion where we're talking about that a group is the list of people, and then it goes and provisions in the right, it goes and provisions the different products and links it to them. So of course there's the public group where the notion of that team being completely public, that you can join, that you can start working out, leave, and have everything that's in it being available, and then the private group where that group is obviously blocked off, or rather that you have to request to join. Now, the products themselves, the one that we go afterwards to gain access to things, in the case of documents, which will be SharePoint, permissions management still is controlled within that product. So SharePoint still has security on top of that, can still add or remove permissions, and of course in the imminent future, a SharePoint site collection will have a group has a site collection, and there is no just that smaller document library, so to speak. So no matter which one we choose, whether you choose to have a public Office 365 group or you choose to have a private Office 365 group, you will still have to manage files inside SharePoint, and if you want permissions to be different, you'll manage it in that product, though there will be some out-of-the-box or default permission set where in a private group only the members have access by default, and in the public everyone does, but nothing stops us, of course, to have a public group and then have a private SharePoint piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And Ben, I can hear the excitement of it coming, because when groups started out, it was either public or private. And if you're a member, you can get access to it. If you can't, then and it's a private group, then sorry about that. But I can hear that excitement in your voice about it being opened up to even more control from a SharePoint perspective, and that merging of sites. So I think like what I've tried to draw there is that where we will end up is having that option. You have files that might be private and some that are public, but as a default, when you start off, as you say, you could choose to have a private group, and those files will be private by default to just the members to start with. So yeah, that's great. Let's sort of come back onto the different use cases as well. So we've got a classes scenario there where the classes could be public or private. How else are we using groups? So Phil, at Lubrizol, Phil and Clay rather, how are you using groups at this stage?
Well, Lily has joined us, so I might want to let her answer that question right now.
Yeah, I see Lily's joined. Her mic's not quite live yet.
Yeah, Lily's she's standing right next to me, so I can give her my mic.
Great.
She can hear, but I'll have to just repeat the question real quick. We're trying to get her audio working.
Oh yeah, sure. So I'll repeat the question. At the moment, we're just working through that question of how are we using groups, whether it's public or private. So at Lubrizol, Lily, what can you share with us about that?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Okay, the question was how are groups being used in Lubrizol in terms of public or private?
Okay. Yeah, currently we haven't fully turned on the groups for the rest of the organization, but the few groups that we are piloting use are currently private.
Okay, and what are they being used for in a private space? What sort of use cases?
So primarily for projects. I do have one group that is using it for coordinating. They're an emergency team, and their plant relies on a lot of drills and so forth. So they're using their group for coordination purposes. But aside from them, generally they're all project-based type of groups.
Right, and that is a common scenario I hear too. I think if Simon Denton was joining us, I've heard him talk about how his organisation uses it extensively for projects. Sorry, go
One more, I'm sorry. Communications, another group that we have that's aside from projects. That group, I'm actually part of that group, and we use it mainly to plan our communications.
Right, internal communications for the organisation.
And the discussion that was going on, this is Phil again, discussion that was going on before about the access to files in groups is really where I struggle with seeing the use case for the public group, because I'm trying to figure out where you would want everybody to be able to come in and be a contributor and able to edit the documents dynamically. And I understand that you can control to some extent and will be gaining more control over those files as SharePoint gets more enabled in groups. But it still seems like I'm more likely to have a group where I have a core group that's going to maintain the files and be able to edit the files, and maybe a wider audience, a public audience that can read them, but not have that member access. And that's what I'm struggling with, is
right.
And where the question is, what's the use case where you would want anybody in the corporation to be able to edit a file in your group?
Right.
Yeah, I'll jump
Thank you,
into
Phil.
it, or do you have, or am I cutting off somebody? We're using groups internally here, so I'll talk about some of our groups. And I mean, it really varies. I think some of that what comes into play is definitely the company culture as well in the scenarios. Maybe in sorry, I'm French. I'm always translating everything, but maybe in the school education is what I was looking for. It could be very, very different than from a product company than from a sales company. So what we have is we have public groups that, for example, could be, for example, I'm looking at our list of groups right now, and one of them is hockey or different social activities that we have. We have a trip that some people are organizing where they need to work on. It's kind of like a project. Then we also have, obviously, more work groups. So we'll have the private marketing group, and then we have one of the more public marketing group where anybody can come and access some of the files that we've been putting into place or available, the marketing collaterals, if you will. But when internally we're working on very specific projects, then we'll create a private group just for that, where only the members, so it's really one thing to look at the members of the group, and that is the notion of public versus private. And then as that story grows, where the fabric, if you want, or everything is linked back together, obviously with SharePoint is still at the early beginnings right now, since we only have access to the library, but it's the ability for that private group to create what we want, like lists, libraries, automate some things with some flows, add a Power App maybe that people can submit some things, and just share that with the entire company, allowing them to view the content, but only allowing the members of the group to be able to have access to it. So in those scenarios, I have private groups, like our partner program, like our support team, like our, I'm looking at some other things I can't mention, like our BI team, where they will have their private group for their own members of the team. Right? There's an owner that takes care of that group, that takes care of the calendar. Some of the members will add some of the things on the calendar. Conversations will be had. Some things going on in Planner. Though not all teams and not all groups will be using all of the different products associated, and that's the benefit of groups, is that in later, if they do choose to use Planner in 6 months or a year, it'll already be available and linked to that, whether it's through the graph or just through whatever discovery available. But then they can always go into that file piece, that SharePoint piece, and be able to share just what they need with the right people or with the entire organization if they need to. So I really, it was difficult at first to even internally have the right communication, but it's to really be able to separate the notion of groups and the notion of SharePoint and what you can do in there. Although, once again, at the moment, we're still in the early stages there. And correct, obviously, I think the company culture will also have some play into it. Yeah,
I like that use case you brought up about encouraging company culture. So groups don't have to be necessarily work groups or project based. It's a perfect example of having a public group. I'll just finish off this section and spill over to the next question with just giving an example from our company at BitTitan, where we are using public groups even from organising our sales territories. So without getting into too many detail, Those groups are public, so that if we're working together as a team, then we've got various documents or ways that we're coordinating our activities. We're using OneNote, of course, because I drove that into the business. But there's sometimes where we need to be able to share that content with people outside of our particular territory. So I can then grab a link to a document. I can say, hey, team member over in a different territory, this is what we're doing. Or if I need some input from some of the other product groups, then they can jump in too. So it kind of comes back to almost like a Yammer-esque kind of open collaboration experience, where some businesses will need to have certain places that are private, but maybe predominantly the culture of your company is to be open, and just have it so that groups are open and available, and people can contribute. So I know that we've got plenty of other use cases and discussions around that particular question, but we will go over now to start talking about the pros and cons. And just for a bit of fun, I thought I'd drop in the old blackboard, whiteboard look and feel. So I'll grab my piece of white chalk, here it is over here, and we're going to try and look at the pros and cons of public or private. So let me think about this. Let's try and do pros over here. Cons.
Were you sharing your screen?
I am sharing my screen, that's right. Some people may have trouble viewing that if we do get that inevitable fun with Skype. Let's see, pros and cons. We've got public and private. Right, so I think we've been discussing some of these already. The idea of having a public group, and this is where Lily's question came about, was she was asking, if we have a public group, what does that mean for people who are contributing to these documents? Do we only want to restrict that to people who are members of that group and allow people to view the documents, or how does that operate? So would you say that's a pro or a con of having a public group?
Well, let's also, it depends, right? Because you have complete control over kind of those permissions as well going on in the SharePoint space. But yes, I would say it's more something that you have to be aware of for sure.
So aware of document permissions. I'm going to fast run out of space, aren't I? And don't wait till I finish drawing on the board. You know, this is not high school. Keep the suggestions coming. What are some other pros about having a public group?
I'd add one that's in both, and I don't want to be the only one speaking here, but the ability, I know I've heard earlier that we limited to only certain people to have the ability to create groups. One of the advantage, both public or private groups that I've seen, is combating, if I can say it like that, but the rogue IT issues, where, you know, I've started having people using all kinds of different things online as the SaaS world continuously grows with things, you know, Dropbox, Trello, Evernote, and all the things that are popping up every other day, and where I see content that's supposed to be owned by our organization and our place of work, if you want, disappearing or being associated to some of my employees' personal Evernote account or whatever the case. And what I see as a big pro in allowing a large majority, now we could eventually say just these specific power users in our company that have some training and know what's going on have the ability to create groups. But a big pro that I see it is that it is not IT controlling the creation of team spaces or groups basically in the company. So I see that as a big pro for us to reduce the issue that we have, which was rogue IT.
Right. Yeah, that's it's certainly a space that Groups has moved into, enabling a organisation to just get on with working, not having to put that request into the IT department to have that group created. We've also heard a lot of discussion around the comm side of that as well, and so maybe let's think about that. What is the con of being able to create a group, if anyone can just create a group?
So we had a similar concern. One thing that Lily and I, we saw that when Yammer was going live, and Yammer people were able to create however many groups they wanted to, and then over time we eventually, how many groups did we have? Hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 groups or something.
Yeah, 800.
So there were about 800 groups, and the majority of them were basically orphan groups. They weren't being used. So we got, right, so like 300, something like that were just not being used. So, and I know that groups has this whole built-in, 90 days of inactivity, it goes away, but, there's still that chaos. So it's almost like you can't control that chaos with people being able to just create the groups at will.
Yeah, that's...
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I 100% agree. We had that issue as well. I added in the chat a link to doing a session at Ignite on groups with Tony Redman, and he created some scripts that you can run to identify any obsolete or groups that aren't used. But I do believe on the roadmap, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's going to be the ability to choose who is going to be able to create Office 365 groups in the company, which definitely will help with that sprawl of groups and products, of course.
There's a number of those features that are available if you know PowerShell enough to button that down and only allow a certain group of people to create groups. We're talking about groups for groups. Exactly. A lot of good features coming there. Coming back to the pros and cons of public groups. So if you do have too many public groups, it can get overwhelming. I definitely hear that, and you do say that even with the the Yammer network side of things as well. We'll just see there was an example of schools that had 40,000 groups. That is huge. So they can get out of control if you don't have some good governance or some rules around it. So I think coming back to Lily's question in the network, one of the cons of having a public group perhaps. Yeah, you go ahead.
You know what? One additional con that I can think of, and perhaps this will be squandered with the upcoming integration with Yammer, but to me it was the lack of fluidity in terms of being able to read through the messages. I mean, when you're in a group and if you have more than 10 members in a group, the conversations can sometimes become confusing and very hard to follow.
Right. Yeah, that's a direct comparison between the reading experience in Yammer versus the reading experience in groups. Slightly different conversation to what we're talking about when we're looking at public or private groups and the pros and cons of either, but certainly a valid consideration.
One thing I wanted to add to that, what Lily just said, is last week we just realized that there's the Groups app for mobile, and we noticed that the conversation piece in mobile was a lot better and more fluid, and we could actually understand what things were. So it's definitely a con, but then there's a small piece, like the pro to that being the mobile version. And the experience mobile it's very good, to say nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, in the conversation... Sorry, you go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
This is Christoph from Microsoft. Just to chime in on this last piece of Yammer and groups, I want to be very clear. Let's not mix a discussion in Outlook, which is groups in Outlook, which is the evolution of DL, with Yammer. When we integrate Yammer with groups, we're integrating with Azure Active Directory, which is what Office 365 Groups is. We are not merging nor combining the modality that exists in Outlook, that exists in Yammer, and you could add Skype for that, for God's sake, pardon my French. So I want to be clear that on the expectation that we're not merging the two, and good feedback that things could be improved on how you consume conversation in Outlook, whether it's the desktop, whether it's the browser, whether it's the mobile app. but that's not going to be combined, and that's not the plan when we integrate the two.
Yeah, there's some good things on the roadmap there for organisations to choose where they want to have their conversations. We do see some good overlaps that are coming where files will be shareable between whether you're using Yammer or Outlook or whatever. So yeah, good things coming there. Thinking about the pros and cons of a private group. So if we're using a group privately, that obviously gives us a nice wall to protect our content so only members can see that. What are you seeing within your organisations as far as pros and cons for private groups? So private content, that's a given.
I assume you have a discoverability problem in many cases, and the owner of the group presumably has to manage the users in a more active fashion than if it's public, right?
Yeah, that is definitely a consideration. Yeah, I think that is the case at this stage, that Delve can't go into a private group and expose that content. Maybe Christoph could clarify that, but I think Delve is supposed to just surface the content that you can view. So if we can get that fear, uncertainty and doubt out of the way of Delve, it's not this scary big evil thing, it's really just showing you what you already have access to see. Christoph, is that the case with Delve and discoverability of content in a private group?
So I think there's two things. It depends what your definition of discoverability is. If it's Daryl and I and everyone on this phone is part of a private group, then by nature we're full-time members. So I should be finding Daryl's PowerPoint, whatever OneNote sketch that he did for this recording, because I'm a member. I'm part of the tent, if I can say so. So that's a bug that we got to fix with Delve, that if you're part of a private group, you're not seeing your document via Delve. That's an issue. So that's what I'm saying, like, are you talking about the discoverability of, hey, Daryl or Benjamin's part of the French-speaking group? Hey, guess what? I know a word or two, so maybe I might want to join and we can have a social at Ignite next month. So there's discovering that community, that group, that project, that team, whatever the group is tasked for, that might be of interest, especially for new hires or just people in large organization. And then once you are being accepted as part of this private group, there's discoverability of things that matters to you, like, hey, Daryl created a document when you were on vacation or updated your document when you were on vacation, and obviously there's room for improvement for Delve, with Delve.
Is there any direction to have multi-levels of membership within groups?
No.
So you could have some members with contribute access and some members with read-only?
Not initially, Phil, and remember, like, the one of the overarching goal with group was to simplify collaboration. And one of the things we learned in the past with SharePoint or with other tools, is we've over-engineered the complexity and the roles. And while for some reason, for some team that have the maturity, fine, that's for a cup of tea and that works. But for a lot of the new the labor is going to be made up of millennials, so we've got a huge new generation entering the workforce by 2020, and we tend to over-engineer things, and the fact that some people are readers and contributors and others are just whatever admin might not make sense to them, and so the intent of group was not to reproduce what SharePoint does or what we could do with distribution lists. Now, if you do need that granularity, then maybe work with the standard SharePoint team site, and then you've got not only the out-of-the-box groups and role-based permissions, but you can obviously create your own on even more granular ones.
That assumes that the only content that people would want read access to is the files in the SharePoint site. But what about having people have read access to the discussions and to the calendar and to the other parts of the group that aren't in SharePoint that you may want to make public from a visibility standpoint, an exposure standpoint, but not from a contribution standpoint?
Yeah, so
I think it's too much complexity to have readers and contributors as two separate groups or roles within the group.
In theory, it always sounds simple. In from an engineering perspective, when you're catering to millions, trust me, I've learned that it's always easy to come from a marketing perspective. Say, yeah, I'll get this great idea. I heard this from a customer. Why don't you do it? And trust me, it always sounds simple, but underneath the hood, it's a little more complex than that. Again, groups is just what you're talking about is the email portion of groups. And today we don't have the notion of just locking down. Let's say Christophe makes an announcement in a group about, I don't know, a team dinner or a picnic or whatever, new compensation. To make a specific email read-only. I mean, it is email at the end of the day from that point of view. And, you can fork that thread. You can forward that email that was sent to a private group to all the hiring manager at your company about the new compensation and then send it to someone else. I mean, it's email. So there's only so much you can do at the end of the day. It's email, and people can do a lot of things that shouldn't be done just by nature of email. In that case, that you can fork and BCC and whatever. I mean, within the group, you can do definitely set retention and e-discovery, but right now it hasn't been a priority to treat certain messages as read-only. The only thing you can do today is obviously you can delete messages, but hopefully because it's within the company, people don't do a lot of crazy things. I mean, it's the same fear we had with when we roll out Yammer and people say, I did ask our IT lead at Microsoft, how many times do you actually have to go delete a message because it's been inappropriate? And at Microsoft, we get about, 200,000 employees in our Yammer network. And you actually say, Christophe, it's actually extremely rare because the message has your picture, it's public or whatever it is. People think twice before posting things. And, you can always correct yourself by deleting a message too. So, it wasn't designed to be to control message permissions and stuff like that. Again, the goal was, if it's a community of interest, if you're using group for a community of interest, it's okay asking questions. You want to encourage questions. It's email. It's like a DL. So that's a lengthy answer to your question. Not a priority on our roadmap. That's not what you think about it.
But a good answer. And it actually, if we just lead into the final question, really, because I do hear some excitement around future pieces of groups. There is the coming capability of having external public groups. So these are groups that, of course, are part of the Office 365 network or infrastructure, but you can invite other people outside of the company to collaborate with you within that group. So we know a little about that. We know something of what's coming. Of course, there's some on the call here who know a lot about it. But from what we know already, how are you planning to use external public groups?
And let me clarify something here, because I think, again, maybe something got lost in translation. It's not external public groups. Whether groups are public or private, you can invite Christophe at Microsoft or Daryl at Contoso. Oh. So the groups, you always manage them. You're the owner, it's in your tenant, and it doesn't matter public-private. You can have in a public group external participants, which are very common. Let's say you got contractors. You don't want to add them to your Active Directory because they're only working for whatever a 2-week stint, yet they're full project contributors. So you want that person to have access to the files, the calendar invites, the notebook, and all the emails, so they can chime in to whatever projects they're part of. And so that's regardless of the privacy setting of the group. And again, you're not making the entire group, you're not bringing that group outside of your firewall, you're just bringing someone who's not part of your Active Directory in the group. And so, yeah, we're definitely getting close to shipping this. And again, a very common use case for any team doing collaboration, because there's always that use case where you do have someone that's not part of your Active Directory, but yet you expect them to chime in and contribute to whatever project you're driving.
Right. So,
and we're testing it out right now, where we're preparing sessions for Ignite. So we've got different people working from different companies, in fact 3 different companies working on one presentation. So of course we have conversations about it and we have access to the file, but the actual group belongs in one of those 3 different organizations' tenant, and we were invited into it to participate in those various activities.
So you're the external user in that case, Ben?
That is correct.
External, to extend that, what Benjamin was saying, it worked not only with B2B, meaning, you know, Christoph joining one of your tenants, so Christoph at Microsoft, but it worked with Christoph at Gmail, Christoph at Yahoo, so any consumer emails. Basically, whatever the 3 billion email domain and addresses are available today will work with any of them. And I can see the fears, so yes, we'll have controls where you can control that at the tenant level and at the group level.
I guess one question, though, is there something in the group that indicates to the members of the group that
you'll have warnings in the banner, in the header. You'll have a reminder in all the messages that there's external participants. And then, like any good governance, Phil and others, I would expect that you're going to say, you know, if you're the project manager, you got a project, a private group going for a project, you're going to say, hey, we're going to bring in Christoph from Microsoft to help us with usage and adoptions. So hopefully, in addition to all the technology investments we're doing to clearly mark this group as being special because they had external participants, we also expect, you know, group owners to notify others, hey, who's this Christoph guy? Who's this foreign object in my group, and what does he have to say about what he thinks about the world and this project? So, yeah, we'll give visual. Yeah, no, exactly. Giving visual cues of that there's someone in that conversation that's not part of your Active Directory, so you might want to hold your tongue on disclosure, but only focus on the project at hand that you can talk about. So good feedback. Hopefully we're addressing those needs, but I'm sure there's more we can do to improve. So
in education, this is a long-awaited feature because lots of schools are looking forward to having parents join in on groups, on discussions, on topics on schools and whatever. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, parents is a great one. We also have a lot of teachers that sometimes want to collaborate across school districts. So they want to share notes and, you know, how do I do this special class and what did you do in your district, in your city? So yeah, definitely a lot of use cases in education.
Yeah, excellent. So we can see it's going to be quite a useful feature to be able to bring in people from outside of an organization. I like that we can include them in a public group where the rest of the organization can also contribute to that content. Perhaps we're going to see more of the use of a private group in that case, where it could be a project and we're bringing in an external contractor or user to be part of that project. Yep, great to see. I think there's a lot coming out in terms of the education space where you've got Microsoft Classroom. There might be some differences in how that operates, but underlying that capability is a group, is an Office 365 group. So there'll be some things that might operate a little differently, and I guess the US is going to experience that soon, or even now as schools go back in. So you might know more about that than we do down here in the Southern Hemisphere. But that's great. Any other ways that we're planning to use external groups just before we wrap up? I guess the imagination boggles.
Oh, but I mean, we're already obviously using it to work on one piece of content, and we're already using the concept of external users in the SharePoint space, of course, for us, either when we're working in marketing, working with people from the press, people from other different companies that we even on our consultant or SI space where we work and help customers build their intranets and so on, we usually have a little space that we can collaborate with them on files, that we can show them some of our first mock-ups where we'll have some conversations, and that will definitely be a big use case right now. We've been using it with Yammer. We've been using it with SharePoint. So it's great to have groups bring that whole piece together into one entity, which is the team for that particular project or that particular scenario. So we're definitely looking forward to that. It's just a lot of those cases we've already started implementing that concept of external people in the various products. So it's not going to change for us, and it's just going to bring it in a more centralized manner, which very highly anticipated.
Yeah, I'll just, I guess, sum up there too, saying something that Christoph said earlier about groups, and the intention was to make this simple, to start with people, creating that group, those services are provisioned, and whatever pieces of those services you want to use, you'll use, and I can see that being really good for bringing in external people to help and collaborate. Adding another layer to what we might already be doing with external DLs or external SharePoint sites, etc. So this is great. Hey, thanks everyone for joining. I know that we're coming to a close. It's gone a little longer than I expected because of the enthusiasm and the great discussion and content. Hopefully, Lillian and those at Lubrizol, you helped to get some of your questions answered. And we're going to share this content on the network. I'll publish that as soon as I can. Thanks all for joining, and have a great day. Good now to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl.
Okay, bye.
And remember, we can continue the discussion on the network as well.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Good plug there, Mike. Okay, bye for now.
Hope to see you all.